In the early hours of August 21, 1942, a bright tropical moon illuminated the northern coast of Guadalcanal. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers moved quietly across a narrow sandbar where a small jungle stream met the Pacific Ocean. The Americans called this stream Alligator Creek, though no alligators lived there. These men advanced in disciplined columns, rifles at the ready, bayonets fixed. They believed they were about to drive a weak and retreating enemy into the sea. These troops formed the advance element of Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki's detachment, a reinforced battalion of 917 officers and men drawn from the veteran 28th Infantry Regiment. They had landed just 2 nights earlier, full of certainty that the American forces on the island numbered no more than a few thousand frightened stragglers. Japanese intelligence reports had assured them the enemy was preparing to evacuate. Victory, they expected, would come swiftly. At about 2:30 a.m., the silence shattered. Concealed Marine positions erupted with heavy machine gun fire, 37mm anti-tank guns firing canister rounds, mortars, and hundreds of rifles. The Japanese soldiers pressed forward in wave after wave, shouting as they charged through shallow water and into carefully placed barbed wire. Marine gunners fired point-blank into the dense formations. Bodies fell in heaps along the sandbar and in the shallows beyond. When dawn broke a few hours later, the battlefield presented a grim sight. More than 800 Japanese dead lay scattered across the narrow front. The creek ran red for hours. Only 15 seriously wounded men were taken prisoner, most of them unconscious when captured. The organized fighting strength of the detachment had been wiped out in a single night. What had arrived as an elite force confident of quick success had, in less than 12 hours, effectively ceased to exist. This sharp, one-sided engagement became known to Americans as the Battle of the Tenaru, after a nearby village on Japanese maps. The Japanese referred to it as the Battle of Alligator Creek. Whatever the name, it marked the first clear land defeat suffered by Imperial Japanese Army ground forces anywhere in the Pacific War. The completeness of the destruction stung commanders at Rabaul and sent ripples of concern all the way to Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo. The disaster did not begin with the night attack itself. 2 days earlier, on the morning of August 19, a smaller Japanese reconnaissance patrol of about 35 men had marched west along the coast from the landing point at Taivu. Their task was to probe the American perimeter and confirm reports that the enemy was weak. Instead, they walked into an ambush laid by a Marine outpost near the same creek mouth. Almost the entire patrol was killed in minutes. Marine patrols later found the bodies, providing the first solid warning that a substantial Japanese force had arrived on the island. That discovery prompted the 1st Marine Division to strengthen defenses along the eastern flank. Barbed wire was strung, machine gun positions improved, and 37mm guns moved forward. When Colonel Ichiki launched his main attack, the Marines were waiting, alert, and ready. The Japanese commander had dismissed the loss of the patrol as minor. He remained convinced that a bold night assault would overwhelm what he believed to be a demoralized foe. In the aftermath, small groups of survivors scattered into the thick jungle on both sides of the battlefield. Some tried to work their way east toward the original landing area at Taivu Point, 22 miles away. Others moved inland, hoping to evade Marine sweeps. A few managed to rejoin Japanese lines weeks later, gaunt and weakened by hunger and malaria. Many simply vanished. Marine patrols reported occasional brief contacts with lone Japanese soldiers or tiny groups deep in the interior long after the battle. Most of those men were never accounted for. Historians have pieced together the story from Marine after-action reports, captured Japanese diaries, and the sparse accounts of survivors who eventually returned home after the war. The outline of events is clear, yet gaps remain. Exact casualty figures vary slightly between sources. The precise moment and manner of Colonel Ichiki's death remain uncertain. Some reports state he burned the regimental colors and then took his own life. Others suggest he fell leading a final charge. The fate of dozens of stragglers who fled into the jungle continues to intrigue researchers. What is beyond dispute is the suddenness of the loss. A proud, experienced unit sailed from Truk expecting to retake a vital airfield in days. Instead, it met prepared defenses and overwhelming firepower. The advance force disappeared as a combat formation before the second, larger element of the regiment could even reach Guadalcanal. The battle became an early warning that the fight for the Solomon Islands would demand far more from both sides than anyone had anticipated. To understand how such a confident and capable force could be destroyed so quickly, we must step back to the weeks and months before the landing, and trace the origins of Colonel Ichiki's detachment itself. The story of the Ichiki detachment begins far from the humid jungles of Guadalcanal, and the cold northern island of Hokkaido, Japan. In June 1942, Japanese military planners selected elements of the 28th Infantry Regiment, part of the 7th Division based at Asahikawa, to form a special mobile force. This regiment had earned a strong reputation during years of fighting in China. Its soldiers were considered among the best in the Imperial Army, hardened by combat and trained for rapid offensive operations. Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki received command of the new detachment. Ichiki was 49 years old, a career officer known for aggressive tactics and strict discipline. He had served in China, where he led troops in sharp, decisive engagements. Fellow officers described him as bold and impatient with delay. Many believed he welcomed the chance to lead an independent force in the Pacific. The original mission appeared straightforward. After the American carrier strikes at Midway in early June, Japanese commanders feared an attempt to recapture the island. They assembled Ichiki's unit, roughly 2,000 men in total, to reinforce Guam as a precaution. When no American landing came, the orders changed. Planners briefly considered sending the detachment to join a second attempt on Midway itself. That operation was soon canceled. By mid-July, the unit reached Truk Lagoon in the Carolines. There it waited under the overall command of the 17th Army, headquartered at Rabaul on New Britain. Japanese intelligence officers tracked American fleet movements in the South Pacific. Reports suggested growing activity near the Solomon Islands. On August 7, 1942, those reports became reality. United States Marines landed on Guadalcanal and nearby Tulagi, seizing the nearly complete Japanese airfield on Guadalcanal in a matter of hours. The news stunned Japanese headquarters. The airfield, named Henderson Field by the Americans after a Marine aviator killed at Midway, represented a direct threat to Rabaul and the entire southern defensive perimeter. Senior officers quickly planned a counterstroke, codenamed Reoperation, to retake the island. The Ichiki detachment, already at hand and considered elite, received orders to spearhead the effort. Critical intelligence failures shaped every decision that followed. Japanese aerial reconnaissance badly underestimated American strength. Pilots reported perhaps 2,000 enemy troops on Guadalcanal, lightly equipped and likely preparing to withdraw. In reality, the 1st Marine Division numbered more than 11,000 well-armed men, supported by growing air and naval forces. This miscalculation convinced commanders that a swift, forceful blow could drive the Americans off the island before major reinforcements arrived. The full Ichiki detachment included about 2,100 men. Planners decided to send the first echelon ahead as a rapid strike force. This advance element consisted of 917 officers and men, headquarters staff, 3 rifle companies, a machine gun company, an infantry gun platoon with 75mm pack howitzers, an engineer platoon, and a signal detachment. They carried heavy weapons for a supposed reconnaissance mission, including 12 heavy machine guns and ample ammunition. On August 16, 6 fast destroyers lifted the first echelon from Truk. Admiral Genichi Mikawa's cruiser force, fresh from its victory at Savo Island on August 9, provided distant cover. The troops endured cramped conditions aboard the warships, but morale remained high. Many soldiers wrote farewell letters home, a common practice before expected combat. Officers assured them the enemy was weak and the operation would end quickly. Colonel Ichiki received explicit instructions from 17th Army staff: land, advance rapidly, and annihilate the American forces. Some historians later noted the wording left little room for caution. The phrase "without delay" appeared repeatedly in orders. Ichiki, already inclined toward bold action, interpreted this as a directive to attack as soon as he confirmed enemy positions. The men of the detachment came from varied backgrounds. Many younger soldiers were recent conscripts from rural Hokkaido farms. Older non-commissioned officers and some company commanders were long-service professionals who had fought across China. They trained rigorously in night attacks, bayonet charges, and rapid movement through difficult terrain. Japanese doctrine emphasized spirit in close combat over firepower. These troops believed their training and determination would overcome any material disadvantage. As the destroyers steamed south, the soldiers prepared their equipment and sharpened bayonets. Few doubted the outcome. Propaganda had portrayed American forces as soft and unwilling to fight hard. Recent naval successes, especially Savo Island, reinforced the sense of superiority. The men expected to recapture the airfield within days and return to base as heroes. The larger second echelon, roughly 1,200 additional troops, remained behind to follow later by slower transports. Japanese planners assumed the first echelon would secure the airfield and prepare positions for the follow-on force. No one seriously considered the possibility that the advance element might be destroyed before the rest arrived. By August 18, the destroyers approached Guadalcanal under cover of darkness. Lookouts scanned the blacked-out coast for signs of enemy activity. The landing site selected was Taiva Point, about 22 miles east of the American perimeter. Japanese staff believed the area remained under their control and free of enemy patrols. With high confidence and incomplete information, the advance force sailed into the unknown. On August 16, 1942, 6 Japanese destroyers slipped out of Truk Lagoon carrying the first echelon of the Ichiki detachment. The ships moved south at high speed, escorted indirectly by heavier units still operating in the area after the Savo Island battle. Aboard the cramped warships, the 917 soldiers endured rough seas in limited space. They slept on decks or in passageways, clutching their rifles and packs. Officers reminded them daily that their mission was urgent. The American landing on Guadalcanal threatened the entire southern front. The voyage took 2 days. Lookouts scanned the horizon for enemy submarines or aircraft. None appeared. Japanese naval control of the slot, the narrow waterway between the Solomon Islands chains, remained strong in daylight hours. By the evening of August 18, the destroyers approached the northern coast of Guadalcanal. Darkness covered the final run-in. At around midnight, the ships anchored off Taiva Point, approximately 22 miles east of the American Lunga perimeter. Unloading began immediately. Landing craft in the destroyers' own boats ferried men and equipment ashore in repeated trips. The process moved smoothly. No opposition appeared. Japanese seaplane tenders had operated from this area only weeks earlier, and staff officers assumed the coast remained secure. By dawn on August 19, all troops, weapons, and supplies stood on the beach. The destroyers turned north and steamed away before American aircraft could locate them. Colonel Ichiki established a temporary command post near Taiva village. He organized his force quickly. The men dug shallow positions in the coconut groves lining the shore. Supplies were stacked under trees for protection against air attack. Morale stayed high. Soldiers shared rumors that the Americans were already preparing to leave the island. Many expected to march west, occupy the airfield, and be home by September. Early on the morning of August 19, Ichiki dispatched a reconnaissance patrol. This group, led by a lieutenant named Tetsuro Sato, included about 35 to 40 men. Their orders were simple: move west along the coastal trail, locate the eastern edge of the American perimeter, and report enemy strength and dispositions. The patrol carried light arms and a few days' rations. They set out shortly after sunrise, following the narrow path through thick vegetation and scattered plantations. By mid-morning, Sato's patrol reached the area near the mouth of Alligator Creek. There they encountered a small Marine outpost from the 1st Battalion, 1st Marines. The Marines had pushed forward listening posts beyond their main line. A brief, sharp firefight erupted. The Japanese soldiers, caught in the open, suffered heavy losses. Almost the entire patrol was killed. A handful may have escaped back into the jungle, but none returned to report to Ichiki. Marine patrols later discovered the bodies and confirmed that organized Japanese forces had landed. News of the missing patrol reached Colonel Ichiki by early afternoon. Scouts brought word of distant shooting. Ichiki interpreted the silence that followed as confirmation that only a weak rearguard remained. He decided not to wait for further information. The main body received orders to prepare to march west at once. Companies formed up along the beach trail. Heavy machine guns and the infantry guns were manhandled forward. Throughout the afternoon and evening of August 19, the detachment advanced steadily. The coastal path wound through dense coconut plantations. Heat and humidity slowed progress, but the men pushed on. They covered roughly 10 miles before halting for the night near Taiba village again, consolidating after the day's movement. Sentries posted outward. Officers gathered for final briefings. Ichiki reiterated that speed was essential. The enemy must not be allowed time to strengthen positions or evacuate. On August 20th, the march resumed at first light. Scouts ranged ahead, reporting occasional signs of American activity but no strong patrols. By midday, advance elements reached points within a few miles of the Marine eastern flank. Observers noted barbed wire and prepared positions across the creek mouth, but distances and vegetation limited accurate counts. Reports back to Ichiki described defenses that appeared hastily built and thinly manned. As the day wore on, Ichiki conferred with his staff. The original plan had allowed for the possibility of waiting for the second echelon, expected in a week or more. But orders from Rabaul stressed immediate action. The colonel faced a clear choice: conduct thorough reconnaissance and delay, or strike at once with the forces at hand. He chose the attack. Years later, survivors recalled his determination. He believed surprise and spirit would overcome any numerical disadvantage. By late afternoon on August 20th, the entire force concentrated in assembly areas east of Alligator Creek. Companies received detailed instructions for a night assault. The main effort would cross the sandbar at the creek mouth. Flanking parties would attempt to ford upstream or swing around the beach. Light machine guns would provide covering fire. No artillery preparation was planned, both to preserve surprise and because the infantry guns lacked sufficient ammunition for prolonged bombardment. Ammunition was distributed. Each soldier received extra rounds and grenades. Bayonets were sharpened. Officers inspected rifles and equipment. Many men ate a final meal of rice and canned fish. Some wrote brief notes to families, entrusting them to comrades. As darkness gathered, the troops moved forward quietly toward their start lines. The night was clear, with a bright moon rising. Visibility across the open sandbar would be good. Marine defenders, alerted by the earlier patrol contact and their own scouts, waited in strengthened positions. Barbed wire stretched across the front. Machine guns covered every approach. 37mm anti-tank guns, loaded with canister, pointed directly down the sandbar. As darkness fell on August 20th, the Japanese soldiers fixed bayonets and prepared to sweep the Americans into the sea. By 11 p.m. on August 20, 1942, the Japanese troops had moved into their final assembly areas east of Alligator Creek. Companies formed in dense columns under the trees. Officers passed final whispered instructions. No light showed. The bright moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting long shadows. The men waited for the signal to advance. Across the narrow front, the Marines of the 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, held their positions in silence. They had spent the previous day improving fields of fire and stringing additional barbed wire. Shortly after midnight, advance parties began probing forward. Small groups crept toward the creek bank, searching for gaps in the defenses. Marine listening posts detected movement. Tension built on both sides. At about 1:30 a.m. on August 21st, the leading Japanese companies emerged from cover and started across the open sandbar. They moved quickly, rifles held high to keep them dry in the shallow water. The moonlight clearly outlined their formations. At 2:30 a.m., the 1st Marine machine guns opened fire. Red tracers arced across the sandbar. Heavy guns from the 1st Special Weapons Battalion joined in, firing 37mm canister rounds that swept the approaches like giant shotguns. The initial Japanese wave faltered under the sudden storm of fire. Men fell in clusters. Survivors pressed on, reaching the barbed wire where they became entangled. Marine riflemen and automatic weapons fired steadily into the packed ranks. Despite the losses, Japanese officers rallied their troops for repeated assaults. Wave followed wave across the sandbar. Soldiers shouted as they charged, attempting to close with bayonets. Marine gunners kept up a sustained volume of fire. The narrow front concentrated the defense. Every approach fell under direct observation and enfilade from positions along the creek bank. Attempts to flank by wading deeper water along the beach failed when Marines shifted fire and illuminated the area with mortars. By 3 a.m., the battle had settled into a grim pattern. Japanese companies fed men forward as quickly as losses mounted. Bodies piled along the wire and in the shallows. Wounded men tried to crawl back under fire. Marine ammunition expenditure ran high, but supply parties kept the guns fed. Colonel Ichiki moved among his troops near the rear, urging continued attacks. He believed the American fire must weaken soon. Around 4 a.m., a stronger effort developed on the Japanese left. A company attempted to cross the creek upstream from the sandbar, seeking to turn the Marine flank. Defenders there, supported by 75mm half-tracks from the 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, met them with concentrated fire. The crossing collapsed. Few Japanese soldiers reached the west bank. Those who did were quickly eliminated in close fighting. As the sky began to lighten shortly before 5 a.m., the surviving Japanese gathered for a final push. Colonel Ichiki reportedly joined this last assault personally. At dawn, the remaining organized groups charged across the sandbar once more. Marine defenders, now fully able to see targets, poured fire into the attack. Newly arrived light tanks from Company B, 1st Tank Battalion, moved forward and added their 37mm guns and machine guns to the defense. The final wave broke completely. By 8 a.m., organized resistance had ended. Marine officers walked the battlefield, counting more than 800 Japanese dead. The creek and beach were covered with bodies and abandoned equipment. Only 15 prisoners were taken, all seriously wounded and unable to resist. A handful of men had slipped away into the jungle on both flanks during the night. Most of the detachment lay dead in front of the Marine line. Colonel Ichiki's fate became one of the immediate uncertainties. Marine reports stated that he was seen falling during the final charge. Some accounts claimed he burned the regimental colors before taking his own life to avoid capture. Japanese survivors who later returned offered varying testimony. No definitive record confirms the exact circumstances. His body was never positively identified among the dead. In the hours after the firing stopped, small groups of survivors scattered. Some moved east along the coast, attempting to return to Taiva Point. Others headed inland through thick vegetation, hoping to evade pursuit. Marine patrols swept the area throughout the day, collecting weapons and documents. They encountered occasional isolated soldiers who surrendered or were killed when they resisted. Over the following weeks, a few stragglers succeeded in reaching Japanese-held positions farther east. Official Japanese records eventually accounted for 128 men from the first echelon who returned alive. These survivors arrived in small parties, weakened by hunger, exposure, and malaria. Their reports provided the first detailed Japanese accounts of the battle. Most described confusion in the darkness and overwhelming enemy fire. Many more men simply disappeared. Marine units reported brief contacts with lone Japanese soldiers or tiny groups in the jungle over the next several months. Some may have lived as isolated holdouts, scavenging food and avoiding contact. Disease and starvation claimed most. No large organized remnant ever reformed. The battlefield itself remained a haunting sight. Bodies lay where they fell for days until burial parties could complete the grim work. Captured diaries and letters revealed the confidence the men had carried into the fight. Personal effects recovered included family photographs, unfinished letters home, and small shrines carried for spiritual protection. In less than 12 hours, an elite force had been erased from the order of battle, leaving behind questions that still linger. The destruction of the Ichiki detachment's first echelon raises questions that historians still debate more than 80 years later. The broad facts are not in dispute. An elite Japanese force of 917 men landed, advanced hastily, and launched a night attack against prepared defenses. Within hours, the unit suffered catastrophic losses. Yet certain details remain unclear, and interpretations of key decisions continue to vary among scholars. One central question concerns Colonel Ichiki's choice to attack immediately rather than wait for the second echelon. Some historians suggest he felt bound by strict orders from 17th Army headquarters. Captured messages in post-war Japanese records include phrases urging him to annihilate the enemy without delay. These instructions left little room for prolonged reconnaissance. Other analysts argue that Ichiki's own aggressive personality played the decisive role. His combat record in China showed a preference for rapid, decisive action. Reports vary on whether he received explicit permission to delay or felt pressure to achieve quick results after the naval victory at Savo Island. Intelligence failures contributed heavily to the disaster. Japanese aerial photographs and pilot reports consistently underestimated American strength. Estimates placed no more than 2,000 Marines on Guadalcanal, many believed to be construction troops rather than combat veterans. In truth, the 1st Marine Division fielded over 11,000 men with strong defensive preparations. Historians point out that confirmation bias affected Japanese staff. They accepted reports that fit pre-existing assumptions about American weakness and dismissed contradictory evidence. The fate of the small reconnaissance patrol on August 19 remains partially obscured. Marine accounts describe an ambush that wiped out most of the 35 to 40 men involved. Exact timing and location differ slightly between patrol reports. Some sources indicate a few Japanese soldiers may have escaped the initial contact and attempted to return east. No survivor from that patrol ever reached Ichiki's main body. The loss should have served as a warning, yet it was interpreted as evidence of only token resistance. Survivor numbers present another area of uncertainty. Official Japanese post-war compilations list 128 men from the first echelon who eventually rejoined friendly lines. These individuals trickled in over several weeks, often in small groups suffering from malnutrition and disease. Historians debate whether this figure is complete. Some accounts suggest additional isolated soldiers lived in the jungle for months before succumbing to illness or starvation. Marine patrol logs from late 1942 and early 1943 mention occasional sightings of lone Japanese figures far behind the lines. These reports rarely resulted in contact, leaving open the possibility that a few men survived undetected for extended periods. Colonel Ichiki's death provides one of the most persistent points of disagreement. Marine witnesses reported seeing a senior officer in the final dawn assault who fell under concentrated fire. Some American accounts claim Japanese troops burned their colors before a last charge, implying Ichiki followed traditional expectations by taking his own life. Japanese survivor testimony conflicts on this point. A few later stated he died leading the attack. Others believed he committed suicide after realizing the scale of defeat. His body was never positively identified on the battlefield. Battlefield recovery teams buried hundreds of dead in mass graves, making individual confirmation impossible. Battlefield archaeology has added limited clarity in recent decades. Modern visitors to the site near Alligator Creek, now part of Guadalcanal's historical areas, find scattered remnants, rusted helmets, ammunition clips, and occasional bone fragments exposed by erosion. Organized recovery efforts by Japanese memorial associations in the 1980s and 1990s located some remains for repatriation. Identification proved difficult due to the passage of time and the nature of the fighting. No artifacts definitively tied to Colonel Ichiki have surfaced. Some historians propose that logistical constraints influenced the hasty attack. The detachment carried only limited rations and ammunition, intended for a short operation. Waiting for the second echelon, transported by slower ships, might have strained supplies in an area exposed to American air attack. This theory suggests practical necessity reinforced Ichiki's natural inclination to strike quickly. Another interpretation focuses on cultural and doctrinal factors. Japanese army training emphasized defensive spirit in close combat. Night attacks and bayonet charges formed core tactics. Defenders behind wire and supported by automatic weapons held inherent advantages that doctrine did not fully account for early in the war. The battle revealed gaps between training and the reality of facing well-equipped Marine defenses. No credible evidence supports claims of betrayal, secret orders to sacrifice the unit, or other speculative explanations sometimes found in popular accounts. All serious analyses rest on documented orders, intelligence reports, and participant recollections. The disaster stemmed from a combination of overconfidence, poor intelligence, restrictive orders, and tactical misjudgment. Though the broad outline is clear, certain details continue to elude historians more than 80 years later. The men of the Ichiki detachment's first echelon were ordinary soldiers carrying extraordinary expectations. Most came from rural Hokkaido, sons of farmers and fishermen raised in harsh winters. Many were in their 20s, some barely out of their teens. Others were seasoned non-commissioned officers who had marched across China and knew the cost of battle. They carried photographs of parents, wives, young children. They tucked letters into their uniforms, promising quick victory and safe return. Few of those promises survived the night of August 21, 1942. When the firing stopped at Alligator Creek, the human scale of the loss became unmistakable. More than 800 bodies lay in neat rows where the waves had fallen. Personal belongings scattered the sand, rice bowls, shaving kits, small Shinto charms for protection. Captured diaries revealed quiet thoughts written in the hours before the attack. One soldier expressed pride in serving the emperor. Another simply asked his family to care for the farm. These fragments remind us that the men who charged across the sandbar were not faceless symbols. They were individuals with hopes, fears, and deep loyalty to their country. The battle changed the course of the Guadalcanal campaign. News of the destruction reached Tokyo within days. Senior officers realized the Americans would not be driven off easily. The quick counterstroke they had planned turned into a 6-month struggle of attrition. Reinforcements poured in, ships were sunk, thousands more lives lost on both sides. The defeat at the Tenaru forced Japan onto the defensive in the Solomons for the first time. It marked the beginning of a long retreat across the Pacific. For the United States Marines, the victory provided crucial confidence. Exhausted after 2 weeks ashore with limited supplies, they had faced their first major ground assault. Holding the line against determined attacks proved they could match Japanese night fighting skill and determination. The engagement became part of Marine Corps lore, taught to new generations as an example of defensive strength and preparation. In Japan, the loss carried deep emotional weight. Families waited months for notification. Many received only brief official notices stating their loved one had died gloriously for the emperor. Some never received any word at all. The full story remained censored during the war. Only after 1945 did survivors speak openly about the confusion and overwhelming fire they faced. Today, remembrance takes quiet forms. On Guadalcanal, the battlefield near Alligator Creek remains largely as it was, overgrown with jungle but marked by simple memorials. Japanese visitors come each year to honor the dead. Small stone markers and offerings appear along the creek bank. American veterans and their families have also visited, paying respect to comrades who held the line and acknowledging the courage of the enemy they faced. In Japan, annual ceremonies in Hokkaido remember the 28th Infantry Regiment. Descendants maintain regimental associations. Some have traveled to Guadalcanal to recover remains or place flowers at the site. Joint American-Japanese memorial events have occurred, bringing former enemies together in shared reflection. Survivor accounts add personal depth to the historical record. One corporal who escaped through the jungle described weeks of hiding, eating roots and coconuts, before reaching safety. Another spoke of the shock at discovering how strong the American positions were. Their stories humanize the statistics and remind us of the chaos of battle. The fight at the Tenaru offers lasting lessons. It shows the danger of underestimating an opponent and relying on incomplete intelligence. It reveals the limits of spirit alone against prepared firepower. It underscores the human cost when plans fail and young men pay the price. Above all, the story matters because it asks us to remember sacrifice on both sides. The Japanese soldiers believed they were defending their nation and families from invasion. The Marines fought to hold ground won at great risk far from home. Both displayed courage under fire. Both suffered in the heat, mud, and disease of Guadalcanal. More than 80 years later, the jungle has reclaimed much of the battlefield. Waves still wash the sandbar at Alligator Creek. Yet the memory of those who fought and fell there endures. We honor them not by glorifying war, but by acknowledging their shared humanity. We study their story to understand the past and to work for a future where such nights no longer occur. The men of the Ichiki Advance Force marched into history expecting triumph. They met tragedy instead. Their loss changed the campaign and helped shape the war's outcome. Their sacrifice, like that of so many others across the Pacific, deserves quiet remembrance. We owe them the simple duty of memory,